We can just take a minute and center ourselves a little bit. As we gather in this virtual space, we acknowledge and honor that the region NCACH serves is on the traditional lands of the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation, both past and present. The traditional territories of the Colville tribes extend across north central and eastern Washington and into portions of British Columbia, Oregon, and Idaho. The Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation include the Lakes, Colville, Okanagan, Moses Columbia, Wenatchee, Inuit, Chelan, Methow, Nispelum, Sampoy, Chief Joseph Band of Nez Perez, and Palouse. We offer this land acknowledgement with gratitude and appreciation for the land itself, and as a commitment to amplifying Indigenous voices and recognizing the harm done to them as a people.
Thank you for that, John, and thanks for everybody and continuing to add your name in. And again, really glad that you're here. Again, I'm Monty. I think I've met many of you, and I guess just to name the fact that my role here is just to kind of help with some facilitation today, and that means helping orient us to what we're actually here to do today, as well as offer up a couple working agreements. So, in addition to reconnecting as partners, this is a little bit of a maybe even a pre-launch of what the North Central ACH partner convenings could start to look like, and offer up some ideas around some of the ideas that have come from some of the peers that a couple are actually on the call, could look like in 2023. And Caroline, I believe, is going to give us some updates on kind of from a broader community perspective. We're going to have a chance to actually practice some community engagement in one of the primary strategies around dialogue, and then have a chance to kind of have some final reflections for one of the last convenings of this type this year, and some ideas for servicing some ideas for what the convenings could look like topically the following year. So hopefully that sounds somewhat close to what you all were hoping, or along the lines of this partner meeting. And I, again, invite any of the folks that have been leading some of these ideas. I see our colleague and friend Nancy on the line, and there are others too, as we offer up some of the ideas that for how this convenings might start to look going forward. But next slide, please, Elizabeth. Yeah, so as always, wanting to be really intentional around kind of our time. We know that everybody's time is valuable, and so thank you for being here, and we'll absolutely start and end on time, if not a little bit before. And as always, just really encourage you all to share airtime and feel hopefully as engaged as you possibly can, or feel moved to both chat or raise your hand. There'll be a number of points where there'll be opportunities to be in dialogue with one another. This is absolutely a safe place to share new ideas and to take risks. And as we often say, how do we really, stay rigorous on ideas? What's important, what's worth doing together, and at the same time remain gentle on people and create space for a whole range of ideas. And that, in essence, is kind of gets at this spirit of dialogue. And that's one of the things that I think in these partner learning sessions and some of the other groups in ways that the North Central ACH as a meeting has been using dialogue. Some of you have seen a version of this slide that we've been using as we continue to deepen our practice and a culture of dialogue. And this kind of, again, compares debate to dialogue, and debate is more of the standard mode, particularly publicly, for how we either make decisions or engage with one another. And as you can see on the slide, it usually assumes there's one right answer. It tends to be a little bit more combative and about win-lose situations, defending truths, as opposed to really seeing that there's a lot of different pieces to this puzzle, and we need a lot of different perspectives. And it's really about discovering common ground and balancing your own ideas with really keeping an open mind and seeking out and welcoming different perspectives. And so that's, I think, been the spirit of these past convenings, and trust that we can kind of even deepen that today as we actually move into some smaller group dialogues around a dialogue guide that's been shaped. So again, I'll just kind of do a light touch on a couple of these slides, and other members of this learning task force would love for you all to kind of add your voice to it, either staff members or Crystal or Nancy, Cecilia, Donnie. I'll kind of name all the folks. I'm not seeing everybody on my screen right now, but I'll just kind of, for the sake of efficiency, summarize that this task force purpose was really to develop some recommendations for the North Central ACH partner convenings, including what type of content, what's worth thinking about, the structure, and how we do outreach. And so those guiding questions kind of cover those things. So, what would make people excited to attend these convenings? What voices or topics do we want to be elevating? How do we continue to incorporate community ideas and feedback? So those were kind of the guiding topics. And again, the underlying premise here is that we know that as a network, continuing to learn together, to build relationships is really central to the success in the short and long run. And these are just a handful of themes that had come up, just again, reminding ourselves what is unique and could really be increasingly a value proposition is keeping this regional approach, the nature of this regional approach to kind of learning and problem solving and how we exchange ideas and really make sure that we're on the same page, given a lot of things going on in the region related to health equity and well-being, how we actually build again the strength of relationships. A number of the recommendations of making sure that this is, action oriented, that there are some pragmatic tools, ideas that can be taken back to your counties, your regions, your coalitions, that you could either act on, some ideas that you could put into practice. So making sure that as much as possible, these convenings have something that is actionable, and a reminder that there's a ton going on in your region right now. And so the last thing that I think the task force decided would want to impinge or undermine a lot of the good work that's already happened, instead really lifting that up and supporting initiatives. And you can see on that right-hand side that this is a big tent, this is a welcoming space for anybody who cares about whole person health, well-being in the region, and particularly want to be intentional about having funded partners here, CHI members, community members, and just any organization committed to the vision or the convening topics. And this next slide are some of the recommendations. That this October convening is kind of a little bit of a pre-launch to starting to step into more of that in the 2023. So this October is just kind of grounding folks in some of those ideas and creating opportunities to kind of be learning more together, particularly around community engagement, and maybe a little bit towards the end where you all see some topics. I want to give space for that.
Drives out darkness.
That's a quick intermission there. And so the other recommendation here is to have these on a quarterly basis, to really design those and do that well, not to have them too frequently, but just enough, and potentially do these in different locations. And so there's some thought of really some hybrid versions of this so that we can start to take advantage of some face-to-face relationship building, again, topics that really impact the region, but also have local implications, and maybe even optional meal. It's a great way of building relationships and network. So since I've essentially summarized those slides, I would love to see if there are any voices that would like to add anything. I saw Nancy, you're on my screen, and you were part of a couple of these and kind of led some of those ideas. So I'm calling you out to see if you or anybody else, Mariah, Morgan, that was part of the task force that would like to add.
Actually, I think you did a great job of covering it.
Great. And just maybe I think the next slide, and thanks for your leadership and volunteering some time on this. Crystal and Cecilia and Donnie and Claire and Nancy, we're all met a couple of times to come up with those recommendations, and Morgan and Mariah were supporting those. So Morgan or Mariah, anybody else want to add anything, double click on anything before we keep moving forward?
Yeah, I think you summarized that really well, Monty. Thank you. Really emphasizing the importance of making sure that we're creating those actionable items and making sure that these meetings stand out from all of our other meetings that we have, and kind of creating their own identity moving forward. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And Morgan, thanks for your leadership. One of the things that I've learned and kind of sitting through those meetings is some of your past communication and organizing and partnering, I think, is going to really serve the group well with some of that expertise in 2023. So
thanks, Monty.
big thanks to the team that volunteered. And again, there's lots of room to shape this together. And I don't know if there are any other comments or questions. Again, welcome the chat, or if anybody else wants to ask something about these regional convenings or recommendations at this point. Or if anybody would say, hey, these sound on target, just feel free to chat or add your voice to your colleagues' recommendations. And again, we'll have some chances throughout towards the end to kind of come back to some topical opportunities. Maybe it's worth just stating the obvious, which is these partner learning convenings is a part of a larger network building strategy and kind of the evolution of this network. And so, Caroline, I think you were going to do a little bit of some updates on bringing about our future state.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. I am Caroline from the North Central ACH, and I have, as you can hear, a little bit of a cold, so I'm just warning you if I end up having a cough attack. I have a couple staff who are ready to pinch hit for me. It seems to hit me at the most inconvenient times. So this slide here is a little bit text heavy, but I thought that I would start with updates specific to things that have been happening this year that were kind of leveraging our prior work under the Medicaid transformation and building on it and kind of taking it to the next level. There's been a lot going on, and I know that in our partner convenings in the first half of the year, we really focused on what some of you might heard of as our pillars, and I'll touch on those a little bit later. And but behind the scenes, the staff has still been working with prior partners and new partners to advance our mission. So there's been a lot of work this year on leveraging the recovery coaches that were trained in the past across our region, improving access to harm reduction across our region, identifying improvements to the behavioral health system. And a number of you that I see in the meeting today were part of those work group meetings. Supporting youth suicide prevention programming in schools across our region, identifying improvements to community-based care coordination infrastructure, building relationships with data partners. This is something that Sarah Bates is really beginning to work on, and that will be really useful to our future work. We also released funds to support cross-sector partnerships and equity initiatives. Those were released kind of halfway through the year, and then we also worked on recruiting and engaging a community review committee. That took us a little bit more time, but they're actually they're operating now, and they're reviewing and assessing applications that come in. So that's been pretty fun to work with them. So a lot's been happening. And on the next slide are just some images that kind of give some life to this. You can see at the top left here, our behavioral health work group, and it met multiple times. Wendy helped kind of bring that together with outside facilitators. And there's a couple exciting projects coming out of that involving some former and new partners. So embedding a kind of mental health triage team in an emergency department, also embedding specialists in libraries that could help address kind of mental health, not from like a clinical perspective, but kind of like mental health first aid and turn people to resources. So because libraries are such an important community entry point, they're now being engaged in our behavioral health system as kind of an innovative partner. On the lower left, that's a little picture, like for the last 2 years, some of our community-based care coordination partners talked a lot about what to do once we discontinued the Pathways Hub. And those conversations have kind of led into 2 concrete work groups that are addressing resource directory issues and also platform issues. And so those work groups are currently meeting every month, and we're kind of co-designing, making sense of what improvements could be made, co-designing, figuring out investments together. We also have Hope Squad that's been spreading across the schools in our region. We have 4 Narcan vending machines, super exciting. You can see that on the map on the right-hand side. There's a location pretty much in every county. And then there's also pilot programs where we're trying to leverage recovery coaches to provide supports to people who are being released from incarceration and also released from the emergency department. So lots and lots going on. And many of you are a part of it. So thanks for staying engaged in this work. And I think it's been fun to kind of break away from the project specific siloed kind of Medicaid transformation projects, and then more into this kind of systems thinking with regional partners. So I hope you feel the same way. And it can be slow work to figure out where to make improvements, but a lot of planning has been going on this year that will lead to exciting work next year. So on the next slide, in parallel to this, we've also been doing a lot of sense making around these pillars that we introduced to you all. So building through an inclusive process of distributed leadership, right? What do we even mean by distributed leadership? Anchoring in shared measurement. What might that look like? How could we partner with public health partners on this? And then advancing transformation as a region through regional portfolio. What does a regional portfolio even look like, right? Those are things that we've been trying to make sense of. And we had a strategy work group. You can see their teeny little thumbnails there, kind of digging into this behind the scenes. And Peter and Nancy, I know you're on the call right now. Feel free to add anything you want when I'm done going through these slides. But you see that little visual with lots of colors. Like, we spent a lot of time trying to think through, like, well, okay, what does this mean concretely? What does building an inclusive process of distributed leadership mean? What would it look like if it were successful? And what would it look like if we didn't make any progress? And so we started getting really concrete about what that means. And it's been work that's been happening all year long so far. And on the next slide, you can see that halfway through 2022, we came together with our board at a July retreat, and we invited some of our other partners, including CHI partners. And we kind of reflected on where we were at. So generally, everyone was feeling really excited about this shift to whole person health and health equity versus kind of like healthcare improvement and decreasing healthcare costs. And then we started really feeling like we're beginning to understand these pillars, right? Beginning to understand them. That means that there were still some things we were trying to make sense of. And then building new relationships and advancing health equity with our partners. That's something that we've been kind of experimenting with this year, and we hope to do a lot more of next year. Now, in terms of what we still felt we needed to work on, there was a sense of like, well, to what end are we doing all this? Why? Can we articulate that so that other people can join in and be excited about this? And then the regional portfolio idea, I think this is one that we really wanted to dig into more and make sense of, because there's a lot of great work already happening. Many of you are a part of it. And it's not that this regional portfolio would replace it or like take it over. It would be that it just provides kind of like shared language and framework. And we'll share a little bit more of that later. And then also integrating capacity building in meaningful ways. Like, how do we support our partners to do this work? Can we bring some trainings around equity or trainings around, skill building, like motivational interviewing, leadership development? So that's something that's in the works as well. So all of these needs that you see on the right-hand side of the slide, since July, we've been working on kind of fleshing those out and clarifying them. So on the next slide, you'll see something that we've been working on, a partner agreement. Sometimes we've called it compact, but we like partner agreement better, that term. And we've been kind of playing around with this why. Why are we trying to work together as a region? Well, our shared aim that we're proposing is that we work together so that all people and places in the North Central Washington region can thrive, no exceptions. And then on the right-hand side, you see an organizing framework that we've already introduced before called the Vital Conditions. And our goal is to use that framework to develop shared language and a shared regional portfolio that kind of balances out both urgent services, right? Responding to crises, and then also vital conditions. Like what are those conditions in our communities that we all need to feel like we're thriving or to actually thrive? So a little bit later, there's an activity that kind of, we want to engage you in seeing whether this resonates, because quite honestly, we're still trying to see and testing this out with our partners so that we can fine tune and make sure that this is like the right direction, right? Because in the spirit of co-design, if our partners were like, this doesn't make sense, it doesn't resonate at all, then we'd have to rethink it. So far, I'm happy to say that it's really resonated with folks. And I'm seeing some of our partners kind of use the vital conditions more in their own work or talk about it. So that's exciting. On the next slide, just real quick, what do we mean by thriving? We're actually going to make sense of this together today. But there's two facets of well-being, and I think we might have introduced this in prior meetings as well. So if it's a repetition for you, hopefully it's useful. If it's new to you, hopefully you'll get excited by this. But I think as individuals, we all have experiences or things happening in our lives that make us feel like we're either thriving, struggling, or suffering. And it's kind of like, how do we feel? Nobody else gets to tell us what we mean by thriving. Now, conditions in the places where we live, the places where we work, conditions they help us reach our potential and feel like we thrive. I'll give you an example. I've been breathing in smoke for the last 3 months, and it's totally getting to my mental health. Like I can't go hiking outside, and it's definitely getting to me. And I know it's temporary, so I'm trying to be patient with it. But this idea that clean air, fair pay, humane housing, routine healthcare, like those are necessities for all of us. And when some of those are not fully functional, then we start to struggle and maybe even suffer. And it's those who are suffering the most that end up needing crisis services. So the cool thing on the next slide is that there's actually a way to measure thriving. It's not just a concept. I mean, today we're going to make sense of the concept and what it means to you, but there is a way to measure thriving, and it's already being measured across the nation. So you can see here some of the measures by county across our state. And I guess a question for us is, will it make sense or will it be helpful if we start to measure this at a little bit more local level? Will it help us inspire new work or prioritize in a different way, depending on where we see pockets of people who are, like a higher proportion of people who are struggling or suffering? I mean, that's a question on the table for next year. The last slide I'll share, just as an introduction of all this stuff that's been going on this year, is the vital conditions slide. And you may have seen this already. It's kind of a companion to social determinants of health that many of you have heard of. It's a bit more accessible language. And the thing that I think we've called out, and that why we in some ways prefer this vital conditions framework, is that it has belonging and civic muscle at the middle. So there's this idea that without belonging and civic muscle, the other 6 conditions really, like, they don't do very well, or some people don't do very well in them. I think if you're used to social determinants of health, you can probably see a lot of the parallels here, right? Transportation, thriving natural world, basic needs. This is where kind of healthcare access would be. Humane housing. There's been a lot of talk about housing needs in our region. Meaningful work and wealth, right? Can we pay for food and housing on our incomes? Do we enjoy our work? Is it fulfilling? And then we have lifelong learning, which is where education and comes in. So there's a lot more links that we can share after the fact, but we're going to play around with these concepts a little bit today through practicing dialogue. And I think that's what I kind of want to leave you with, is that this shared aim and these vital conditions, we know that we need to engage our community partners to see if this resonates. And community engagement is something that we're going to be digging a lot more into in different ways next year. And we've tested this out with our board. Our board is kind of facilitating some conversations, and we're going to do that today. So I think that's a segue to the next slide, but maybe we can take a quick pause here, because I would love to see if any of you have questions about these activities that I've just shared, whether they're the ones that have to do with the more concrete work, or whether they're the ones that have to do with pillars. Any questions or areas where you'd like more clarity from us or more details?
Hi, Caroline, this is Crystal. Thanks for sharing this update. I think it was really great. And it was nice to see it all kind of together. I think when you were sharing the concrete projects, I've heard about them all kind of in different places throughout the year, but it was nice to see them all in one place. Same with the sense making of the pillars. On the concrete projects, I guess I would love, not now, but I would love to know more about like how the Hope Squad implementation is going, and like the jail and ED pilots. I think those are really cool projects, and just hearing about the implementation of them across the region would be really cool.
Yeah, because there's a lot of lessons learned in all of the work that I shared on the prior slides. There's starts, fits, and stops. You know, like sometimes even the recovery coach pilots, some of the partnerships like we thought were going, and then there's staff turnover. There's things that happen that sometimes make the implementation slow down, but then as you all are used to, you just keep plugging away at it, pushing, and then eventually it starts to build momentum. So yeah, we have so many updates, and I think, Crystal, it is a struggle, I think, sometimes for us on the team to figure out like the best way to communicate this out. Like, is it through the newsletters? Do people even read the newsletters? Is it through videos? We do some of those updates at the board level, but not everybody attends the board level. So we're definitely thinking about how to do this in a way that's helpful to all partners to know what's going on, and hopefully not like do it in every single meeting, because then I think it'll become like too much repetition, duplication.
And Caroline, if someone really is interested, they're always welcome to come to the board meetings.
True.
Yeah.
I know people are dying to go to a 2.5-hour board meeting. But those are open to the public. You're always welcome. Any other questions or comments? I also, I wanted to call out that, in the middle of all this activity, we also had some turnover in our communications staff, and we're so excited to have Morgan here and her expertise. I think it's going to be really helpful. And, like anything, it takes months to get used to a job. So she's been on a steep learning curve, but that communications kind of capacity was hampered at a time when there were lots of changes and transitions. And I think that just kind of contributed to people wondering like, what's going on? So Morgan is going to be really, really integral to sharing out updates next year. And yeah, contact us anytime too. We're pretty accessible folks. So if any of you have questions about some of this specific work, vending machines, Narcan vending machines, harm reduction, call Joey. Community-based care coordination, call me. Behavioral health work group, call Wendy. Hope Squad, call Mariah. Like we're all here to let you know. So sometimes those little off the cuff, on the side updates are even more useful.
So Caroline, maybe I should know this, but I don't. So I'm just going to say it. Wondering if those types of contacts and projects are listed on the webpage. So if
that's exactly why I called out the fact that our communications kind of systems were hampered this year. in a perfect world, we would have had like a website that worked really well and that was easy to update. As Morgan has discovered, it's very convoluted and difficult to update. And so a website overhaul is something that we're working on. But yes, in a perfect world, Nancy, we would have been able to share out this information a lot more fluidly through our website and other channels. And it just, you know, perfect storm this year. So
Okay.
next year, website 2.0, right, Morgan?
Yeah, thanks for touching on that, Caroline. I'm really excited about some of the, just transitions with the website and getting something that's really going to be valuable for our partners to be able to obtain information and updates. And so, yeah, lots more to come on that soon.
I think you guys are doing a good job. And just to clarify my comment about wanting to learn more about those projects is more to let you guys know that we are interested, I guess, and like the detail of these projects, it's really cool stuff. So it wasn't at all like you're not getting the information out there or something.
But we weren't on some things, Crystal, right? Like, to be honest, like we weren't, because our systems were just like not working this year as well as we would have liked. And then there's just so much going on. So yes, we totally hear your feedback, and we really look forward to doing more of that next year, because there's a lot of exciting work, and maybe if some people weren't aware of it, they'll want to join in. So that's the whole point. Join in the fun. So Monty, I think handing it back to you. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Caroline.
I'm glad I didn't have a coughing fit.
Yeah, I am too. And yeah, you seem like you're picking up energy as you're talking about this, maybe because you're excited, I hope. And thanks for sharing your vulnerability too, Caroline, with the smoke and mental health. And I think just a reminder that this isn't easy, and our mental and physical health is all of us can feel challenged by that. And there's a ton that's going on, as this was a bridge year, as many of you know, going into it around how to, you both move a lot of these projects forward, and that's been happening at the same time you're building a new infrastructure, a new approach to kind of post-Medicaid transformation. And Crystal, your comments, I think, remind me of the task group, which is, if we're going to be a really good partner, network, we need to have just enough information. We need to be on the same page. We need to see the same picture. And how do we do that in a way that's not these kind of boring report out calls? And there may be other ways of doing that, so that we really get to the meat of some of these exciting projects and find ways for people to be engaged. So it's really exciting to see. And by the way, I just, as a quick aside, I'm here in Colorado, I mentioned, and yesterday or last couple of days, I've been with the National Community Health Centers, and Jesus Hernandez was out here, and I happened to be in a meeting with him, and it was all about thriving in the vital conditions and how community health centers are really wanting to lean into that. And Jesus was really talking about some of the work in North Central. And so it was kind of an exciting example, at least in my mind, of speaking a common language and being on the kind of early edge of kind of some of this thriving well-being work. It offers a lot of opportunities. So this community engagement, as Caroline suggested, is really important as moving outside of Medicaid transformation and really centering on whole community, whole people's health. And so there's a number of engagement strategies. Again, you can read them on the screen, but really building, or in some cases deepening or repairing relationships where there's been trust that needs to be built, whether it's from the North Sound ACH or just legacies where trust maybe with institutions has been damaged in some ways, to really listen to partners, to really hear if we're doing this in a directionally correct way, as Caroline had proposed, and to really share the vision so that we have a shared language and set the stage for some co-creation. And this is an opportunity for really building the capacity of board and strategy work groups so that they are embedded in community, the perspectives of community. So there's a lot of different ways that community engagement may play out over the months and years to come. And one of those places that, we found in a lot of other communities, and I think you all have too in some ways, is using dialogue. Dialogue is not just another form of talking, but, it's a way of engaging each other that builds trust, respect, and actually paves the way for some pretty bold actions, is what we found. So it's not always the end goal is action, but it's really what supports networks like this and being able to take collaborative action. And so the simplest definition of dialogue, I presented a slide earlier on, but it's listening what's true for others, listening what's true for us, and really listening for what we might have in common. And a number of folks, I won't be able to name everybody, have come up with a little bit of a dialogue guide so that we start to norm around things like thriving and what we know about our community's well-being and what we see is important for how we're working together as ways of bringing in other voices. So this dialogue guide, and thanks to Elizabeth for pulling this up, is something we would invite any and all of you to actually use, and we can talk a little bit more on the other end of this around what this could look like, but we want to first give you a flavor of what it could be to be in dialogue around some of these areas. So I'm going to just go through what is really an abbreviated version of this community dialogue guide around thriving people and places in North Central Washington. And I think Elizabeth in a moment is going to actually chat out the full guide, and we're going to get in small groups and use an abbreviated version of that. But what we're going to invite you to do, and what we hope that some of you will do outside of this meeting, is to go through something like this. And, this first round of question is really getting to know each other. So you may know some of the people in your small group, you may not know everybody. And so this format is based on living room conversations. And so it gives people actually multiple questions, and people choose one that you'd like to kind of speak into to introduce yourself. So to take about 10 minutes around what drives you, a sense of purpose or mission, or where you're seeing or feeling a sense of belonging. So don't you answer all those, pick one of those that feels right for you for about 10 minutes. And then the second round, approximately 15 minutes, and this doesn't have to be perfect. We'll give you some reminders of where we are in a time check, is just some of the stuff that Caroline was presenting, that we're, as a region really looking to adopt thriving as a North Star, as a shared vision, and how we really think about that as a way of unifying a lot of different collaborative efforts and organizations within the region. And so you can read through that a little bit more on your leisure, but the questions in this round 2 are inviting people to take a couple of minutes and everybody to go through with that first question around how you would describe your community's level of thriving right now. And as Caroline said, there's not one right definition for thriving. There are some very definitive ways of measuring it, but it's helpful to hear all the different, from the spirit of puzzle learning. Well, how are you all thinking about that? Where do you see thriving and struggling, and how would we know? And then invite everybody to kind of add into kind of how will you know when, people and places are healthier, more thriving, as we kind of think about the future. So again, 15 minutes, everybody do that first bullet. And then that second one is just kind of offering everybody to kind of join in. And then the third round is really thinking about how we work together more collaboratively. And so you can see the couple questions there when it comes to kind of taking action and proving how we work together. When you think about, that, what's it going to take? Where are we getting stuck around being able to work across organizations, geographies, and what could change that? So I wanted to be really kind of action oriented, to be honest about what's not working, but what could help us to work better, particularly in the context of the North Central, this ACH, and what would it take to work differently together? So that's a little bit of an open conversation that everybody can offer up. I think you may have a staff or somebody helping to facilitate, but these are questions that anybody can just look on, and Elizabeth just put the guide in there. So we're going to give you about 40 minutes. So this is an abbreviated dialogue. You're going to magically go into smaller groups. We'll give reminders for each round, and then we'll just kind of hear what emerged from just being in dialogue with each other. So enjoy your time with your fellow partners.
All right, here we go.
Thanks, Teresa. That was very efficient, Teresa. Thank you.
Oh, Con didn't get. Well, oh, there she was. Okay. I'm gonna go join a room too.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah. Okay. So at 10:50, I'll send a broadcast to change rounds. I'm just looking at the assignments to see if there's actually a staff person. Awesome. Teresa got a staff person in every room.
Cool. Chris, I'm sorry to hear your lingering cough. I'm sorry, Elizabeth.
Sorry. Yes, I do have a lingering cough. That's why I keep muting myself. Yeah, it's just sticking around. Yeah, and I was sick this past weekend.
You know what? Pause the recording.
Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome back from your small groups. I think we had five small group breakouts. So I trust you enjoyed connecting with some of your community members, neighbors, if you will, regional neighbors. So no agenda. This is a dialogue. This is open to you all. So would love to, if you all, we're just large enough, if you don't mind, on the bottom, you could just, if you'd like to, raise your hand. So because my eyes are not always that good, I may not catch you otherwise, but would love to just kind of hear generally, particularly starting with, how would you characterize, this region and whether we're thriving or not, and, who's suffering, struggling, thriving? What came out of that very first question for some of you, the insights that you heard or themes? Who would be brave enough to kick us off or kind enough?
I saw that Sarah raised her hand. She was in my group. If Sarah
Great.
wants to touch on that.
Please.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of echo some of the things I heard in terms of that, it's kind of like the wolf pack metaphor, right? That you're only as strong as kind of your weakest member. And so if in a community, if we have those who are suffering, then, perhaps our community as a whole is suffering, because if we're able to help move those members who are suffering towards struggling and thriving, then we all have our lives improved in the process. And so, by helping those kind of at the back of the pack, we all are able to move forward. So.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks for kicking us off, Sarah. What else came out as you were characterizing thriving or building off anything that Sarah just shared?
I think our group went down. Sorry, Crystal raised her hand and I just broke
Go
all
for it. You go.
Go for it, Wendy. We'll get Crystal after that.
We went down this because our group of 5 and where we're went down this negative path, because we're talking about the struggles of our individuals that we're working with and we're trying to. So of course, when you look at it through that lens, you feel like it's not thriving. But when you start to look up and you widen your vision, you could live in a bubble where everyone's thriving, or you can live in a bubble where no one's thriving. But if you start to look up, you realize that everyone's on that spectrum and that there is opportunities to bring hope to individuals, and that thriving for one person doesn't mean the same thing for the next. One used the example of an ecosystem, and we talk about the ecosystem of plants. Some need a little bit of water, some need a lot of water, some need a little sunshine, some don't want a lot of sunshine. So there's just varying degrees of what an individual needs, and allowing them to describe if they are thriving or not us describing them.
Yeah, I'm really appreciating Wendy Harris saying that this spectrum. I think it's really easy for us to kind of either bifurcate or be extreme one way or another, and to recognize, that there are different ways that people are going to express thriving, and people can actually be in the same household, the same family, experience the same things, and actually the way they think, feel, or function and how they're perceived that might be a little bit different, which again doesn't take away from the fact that we do have some really reliable measures of thriving, and we know these vital conditions actually do add up for everybody. And Sarah, to your point earlier, I really love that. I mean, this idea of our interdependence, and we know this, the World Health Organization has been doing this for decades, that when some portion of our population's quality of life or health or well-being goes down, everybody's does. It's not just an opinion, it just, we see those indicators. And so this interdependence. What else came out of your thoughts around thriving or insights around thriving?
Crystal, now I'm dying to know what you were going to say earlier.
Oh, Wendy and I were in the same group, so
Okay.
we were, yeah. But I think she summarized it well. I was really focused when we first started thinking about it of like the folks who my work serves, which and I think a lot of the programs are working to move people from suffering to struggling, and so thinking about even the next level of thriving was a kind of a big thing to think about.
Mhm. Chris, one of the things that I've learned in this work and I've been finding really fascinating is in the dynamics of thriving. I mean, on the science side of this, not just kind of our art and our experiences of that, is that we can move people from suffering to struggling by doing a better job of delivering urgent services to them, to do it in more efficient, more effective ways, in more humane ways, more relational ways. But still, it's very difficult to urgent service our way into thriving. If
Right.
people are not experiencing stable housing and reliable transportation or food, but just these urgent services that are really temporarily designed to get people back on their feet, if that becomes the permanent way, it kind of perpetuates people stuck in a struggling people and families. And so to me, it's one of the more interesting ideas around how do we both attend to people suffering and start to create those conditions that people actually can experiencing more agency and thriving.
And Monty, like when you said relational ways, that really, like, my ear caught that, because just being in our little group was so great to hear more kind of personal insights about what thriving means to Sherry, Julie, Jerry, and Joey, right? And like, for whatever reason, we struggled to really share that out with the broad group, but it was a really great smaller conversation. And I think that relational work of knowing one another as human beings and understanding like what, what drives us, what frustrates us is so important. Otherwise, I think, I don't know, there can be a lot of missed opportunities when we don't know one another, or misunderstandings.
Thanks, Caroline. Other ideas that came out of, or even ideas around how will we know as we start to see thriving? Did you have any thoughts on that? What would we expect or hope to see as we see more and more people and families thriving?
I'll comment, Monty, like when we talked about expecting to see how will we see families and groups thriving, I think a lot of our group were discussing the plethora of issues that could cause struggling, suffering, and thriving. And to me, a lot of like, there's so much out there to quantify in small bits and pieces. But to me, like when I see my community and the community members have hope for a better life, and that they have the ability and that would be attainable for them to continue to advance the thriving, I think that's a good sign. I think there will always be people in the three levels at some degree, but if they can see themselves progressing up the chain, I think that's, to me, when I feel like our community is moving that direction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, just like we know that mental health is a continuum that all of us on a daily, monthly, yearly basis, depending on what season we're in life, is not always in one perfect part of that continuum at any one point. And the same with all of us, these kind of blunt instruments that are really valid around thriving and struggling and suffering are not perfect. It is still a continuum. This term hope's come up at least 3 times I've kind of noted, which is interesting. How do we, not just kind of tank, how do we keep eyes wide open around who is suffering and struggling, but how do we keep the hope up? Makes me curious how you all are thinking about it. Are people believing that there is a possibility?
I also would say that I think if you look at it from suffering to thriving, it seems like such a big task that if we could just move slowly into struggling and look at like some of those small factors, I think I get stuck a lot on like a lot of things that we may not have the ability to change, like housing costs and rental costs and the job market and gas prices, food prices, all the inflation stuff. And it's just, how do we get past that point and still move into the right direction? I think it just can be difficult to look at as a big picture.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Joey. Yeah, some of the stuff really does take time, and just continuing to move in the right direction seems really important.
Yes, and I wonder with that, when we like it feels overwhelming. There's so many structural things we cannot change, but like there are some really great minds here in this room. Let's look at price of housing. Well, some of that is by building codes. Like, and we can go to our county commissioners and talk about, can we talk about zoning? Can we talk about building codes? Can we talk about building low income housing in a way that would actually make the units affordable? And like, we have some ability to do that, but those details are so hard to know unless you're a subject matter expert. So combining with people who know that stuff and taking the power of like some of this group in the mind and say, let's go to that root cause and figuring it out. That's the kind of stuff I think we could do.
Mm-hmm.
Finding those subject matter experts and combining it all is the challenge.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And Peter.
So I was struck in this and other conversations by how belonging and thriving are tied together, and that so much is about perception, or the reality of income and wealth disparities, and it's hard to feel like you're thriving if in comparison to others you look like you're doing poorly. And that's a reality, but it's also a state of mind. And someone I met was talking about living in rural Africa and doing work there where, by our standards, everyone was very, very poor and not very well off. And by our standards, they didn't look like they were thriving, but everyone was in the same boat. And, they had community and they took care of one another, and no one felt like they were left behind. And I thought, bingo, we're in a world that's very competitive and where disparities are built in, and it's very hard to feel like you're thriving, and even if you may have barely enough. If you look around and say, I don't belong here, I don't fit with this community.
Yeah. I think it's really important insight. I mean, even comparing ourselves to other countries, I mean, the things that divide us, including wealth, is so enormous, and it's growing in our country. And I just watched a video this morning before starting this time with you all together around, I live in Oregon, and there's a pretty serious movement for succession, to Eastern Oregon, to Idaho, that folks in rural areas felt like that they have not been heard in Oregon, and that their voices, and they do not belong here. And I think we're seeing a lot of this division somewhat playing out politically, but it's more than that, around who belongs or who doesn't. And I think you all put your finger on it. We know if people feel like they belong, they're more likely to contribute. And Joey, I was thinking about your comment. I was in Wisconsin. One of the leaders of the community health center was talking about this man who had been spending some time in jail, hadn't had health insurance, had been experiencing intermittent homelessness in some ways, and got insurance. And this was in the course of like 7 months, got into a job program and kind of repaired a relationship with the family that he'd been in. So it's not to say that happens to everybody, but he literally had gone from really suffering to feeling like he was more in line with kind of finding purposeful work, and just a couple of small things tip these things. And I think, whether that's housing and how we work together, that could also be meeting other challenges or opportunities. I'm really curious what thoughts, real quickly, and I don't want to take too much more time, how we work together, how we bring subject matter experts, how we bring community voice in, how do we use our collective power to make some big things happen, to move folks along the continuum. Did you have any thoughts on that? How we work together differently, better? I know it's just a small question, but wonder if anybody would offer some insight. How well are we working now? What could we do better? Anything come out of that?
I'll pop in here. So I guess what comes to my mind is that I mean, in the 16 years I've been practicing in this community, we've done things pretty much the same way. I think we convene groups that are intensely passionate, that really have a focus on wanting to make a change, and they drill in and they make that one change, and it gets done, and it does the work, but it's not this bigger umbrella sort of change. And what I feel like is happening in our community recently, and probably in the last even 5 years or so, is that we have pockets of really amazing things that are happening. I think the NCACH is one of those pockets. I think Our Valley, Our Future is another pocket, and there's lots of other pockets that are happening and kind of coming together and starting. Now the members are started figuring out like, hey, they've got that going on, so let's not do that, let's fill in between. And so what we're starting to see is this web of amazingness that's starting to really, in my opinion, shift the bar differently. I think one of the meetings that recently I attended was the behavioral health, I think we're calling it redesign now, that Wendy led, and there was a lot of pushback on that. I mean, Wendy put on 10 hours on people's schedule, and some 3 or 4 of them were full day schedules. And I mean, it was craziness. Like, people were behind the scenes really bitching about all of the amount of hours people would have to dedicate. And we've never changed the bar. We've never moved anything. And like, why really, who is this person who's going to do this? And I mean, it really, I thought it was kind of amazing, but just to recognize that that's the level of like angst at putting an hour into my calendar. God, who are you to ask for an entire day of my schedule? And then what happened was really powerful, right? I mean, there was a group of people from all of our entire region at all different levels in their job, and kind of, I mean, I can remember the people from the library being there, and everybody kind of looking at me like, what's the library doing here? And really, by the end, that was one of the main projects that came out of it, but it really came from relationship. And I think someone else said relationships and belonging, and it really is about getting us into the room to be able to coalesce and understand things from other people's perspective, because that is what's going to move the bar moving forward. And I feel like it was hugely impactful for me to witness, to be a witness for, but I think to recognize that when I look at all of the systems that are starting to play with each other differently, that is the key piece, is that we're starting to kind of attend different meetings and participate differently.
You had me with amazingness, by the way. But there's so much there, and that example that you and Wendy and others were leading, I think, is a good example. People are reluctant, everybody's so full, but we all are so, I think, wired to want to connect, to do something big together, to do something different. And so it's a good reminder that this isn't easy. There's some barriers to overcome around engagement and doing this, but there's an appetite for it, and the relationships are really key.
And Monty, I wanted to add to something that Julie just mentioned. I know that Wendy also got a little bit of pushback about whether the right people were in the room for that work group. And we talked a lot about that internally as a team. Like, what does that even mean, right? Like, who are the right people? And it got us thinking about leadership development and what people, the traditional thinking around what a leader is, and versus like this kind of shared distributed leadership that we're really trying to embrace as an ACH. And like, there's this saying in open space kind of meeting settings that whoever's in the room are the right people, right? And so like, but there's still this very big push, I think, Julie, that like there's this traditional way of thinking, like, who are the leaders that should be at this table? And if they're not like the people with the degrees or the titles, it like there's this sense that it's no longer a valid community effort, which I think is something we really want to challenge ourselves around as a region.
I see it as like the kind of what you talk about, which is the thought leaders, right? So it's the people that show up and that they potentially bring in a different view. And sometimes the people that aren't the ones running the company have an amazing view because they see the actual gaps in care and they're actually participating in things in a different way. The problem is where people struggle is that there's a cliff there between those thought leaders that might not be actual leaders in the company, and kind of how do you move that bar in the company? How do you get a system that's as big as Confluence Health to actually move the bar when you're one person that maybe has limited voice and don't show up to some of those meetings? And I think that's where the disconnect and where our thinking comes in, right? Because we believe that you have to be the CEO or the executive director or someone to be at the table.
Yeah, it's a very powerful mental model that I think we can all like work every day to challenge, because the subject matter experts are those that are like suffering. And Joey always reminds us of that. So thank you, Joey.
Yeah, and I think in our internal kind of wrestling with that, you know, we also recognize that those who are the CEOs and leaders aren't necessarily great like diversity wise of our region, and perhaps those who do show up are maybe closer to a good representation of who we are as a region, and we'll have a better voice for those who are suffering, and also yeah, we can help amplify those voices through this process. So
yeah, so well said. There's so many great comments in the chat that I encourage you all, you know, to take a look at. And part of this is creating hope. It's creating some new narratives. It's people want to join things that they think are going to happen. And, you know, the traditional meetings and Zoom, you know, are not the places necessarily that everybody wants to join to be in really generative spaces. It sounds like some of the work that you all were doing, Wendy, in the behavioral health, and I just being with all of these community health center leaders yesterday, and some of the really cool things that is happening in Yakima, which is, you know, a bit of a neighbor to you around housing, around multi-sector work. There's a lot of energy and a lot of funding and a lot of creativity in the area of housing that, again, is a multi-solver for mental health, adjacent to food access, and starting to really build people into more of the you know, humane housing for folks, and not just some of the transitional, which is critical too. So I think you all put your finger on the value proposition of what these dialogues are about, which is it's about building people's sense of belonging and connection and relationships, which is what we all need. And it's about building power. So hopefully a little flavor of this could imagine that in the short run, I think the board members and staff and all of you, there's going to be opportunities to engage in these dialogues. And Caroline, I'm going to pass it to you in a second. You can kind of add to that. But these dialogue guides we're hoping get used in some cases, and just even the practice of dialogue to get people's voice and how they're thinking about this work. This is the starting point of building a network. So thank you for engaging. It sounds like the questions themselves worked relatively well. Is that a fair assumption, by the way?
Yeah.
And we could continue to build on this process. You all could figure out some of the groups that we work with, they'll do these types of dialogues every year. They'll start to be tracking well-being and thriving, and they start to kind of figure out some new questions, and maybe they want to go into housing a little bit more deeply, or mental health. And so the sky's the limit. There's not one kind of prescriptive formula here, but this is a starting point that some of you created, and sounds like we can go with it for a while. Caroline, I'm going to boomerang it over to you to see where you'd like to pick up on that, and even think about some of the partner convenings and work.
Yeah, and I actually was going to invite Mariah into this because she's been doing a lot more thinking than I with the learning task force. So Mariah, consider me your support, but handing you the mic.
And maybe we can just open it up to anyone that's been on the task force. Morgan, if you want to chime in as well, really anyone. I think we're kind of this last 15 minutes or so wanting to think about how we utilize this meeting space for 2023, and some ideas for maybe topics that are of interest to the group, or just any ideas from really anyone on what's the best use for this time. And we mentioned at the beginning we'll be shifting to that quarterly convening schedule, and we've discussed possibly, offering it in a hybrid model where we do travel around the region and we have that in-person space for those that are able to make it and have that networking face-to-face, and then also still have the virtual option for those that aren't able to attend. And I did see, and Caroline, thank you for bringing that up, Ton, your topic, if you want to talk a little bit more about what you put in the chat maybe, and that could be maybe a potential starting point for.
Yes, so this is like, I'm not coming out with you like a whole bunch of double-blind studies, right? I'm coming up with a community member and someone with experience in the area. We talk about housing, there's not enough housing. So why isn't there enough housing, right? Well, we can talk to the landlords and builders and know why they're not building more low-income housing. Well, it's because the code restrictions are terrible. It's because the zoning is terrible. You can't put that many houses together. Do we want fourplex or do we want individual dwellings with fenced yards because people like their pets? I mean, there are really arcane details that go into this that I believe builders and landlords have, but they're not going to go to the PUD meeting and talk to the commissioners. They're not going to go. They don't want to take the time nor energy to go and deal with bureaucracy that moves slower than slow, right? That's not going to happen. So could we have some forum for people to say, these are ideas, these are things that don't work for us. When I have to build a 1-bedroom, 1-bath house to the same specifications as a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, I'm going to lose money and I cannot rent it out at $500 a month. So those are the type of ideas, I think, really practical ideas that we need to get in front of these in meetings. And then people want to have pets. That's really, at least in our region, what people want to have. Do you know how many places don't allow pets and the barriers to people keeping them out? So ideas like that, I think, but making it really inviting and easy for people to show up who are not used to having meetings that last forever and do a whole bunch of things that we always have to do.
Can I jump in quickly? Ton, I think that's a really, really insightful thing to be hitting on. One of the things that we talked about with the vital conditions is trying to understand what are the systems that hold problems in place. Rather, so much of our attention goes to trying to address the problems, which is great, but if you don't understand what are the forces that can perpetuate the problem, then you're just going to be in the same cycle forever. And so the kinds of things that you're talking about are really powerful, and it's a unique value that the ACH and this group can hold, is that to be the group that comes together to focus on that kind of system level change and coming together to advocate for making kind of the shifts that are necessary to not have those problems be held in place.
I was just gonna, Mariah, pull that thread too, that's come. One of the things that we found with networks, I won't be surprised you, is that stories go a long way. And so what are other regional rural communities doing around housing that is working, that have the same challenges, either economically with restrictive zoning, not creating those conditions by which builders or public assistant providers are able to kind of work together? So not to be Pollyannish, but that's, usually when I ask communities like, where'd you come up with that idea? It's not very often it's like, wow, our neighboring county or this other state did this thing. We started to hear about it and we explored it. So putting the aspiration and what's possible, in context of these kind of classic systems challenges they have around housing could be an interesting start to that.
And while I'm on a roll here, the other idea I see is public health and healthcare should not be two separate things. And it is, and it's hard. How can we go about changing that?
Definitely. Yeah. I think that this is something that we've really seen, historically doing all the Medicaid transformation work when I was in my previous role as practice facilitator, and we needed to make those improvements in the health systems, but then that greater, public health system was often left out of our work. And so the shift that we're doing now, I think is, I've really enjoyed broadening it. And I think that that's something we need to kind of look at. And I see some in the chat, different comments. And Peter, if you want to talk a little bit more about your maybe your chat.
Oh, I just, you know, I'm one of those people that can always highlight problems and barriers, but, you know, to be a glass, you know, half full kind of guy, I think it's always inspirational to see examples of good collaborative community health projects, you know, where organizations or people working together to do something unique. It helps change the narrative of what's possible. It also helps us focus on sort of what were the critical success factors in getting that collaboration to happen, you know, so that we can understand what it takes to make these things work and, you know, inspire us. So, and also maybe replicate them, you know, those kinds of things. So we've seen lots of good things from outside the region, and they're great as well. But if we have some homegrown ones, then, you know, it helps give energy to them to be recognized, and also helps us to maybe find ways to spread them.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great idea, Peter. And maybe that's something we can incorporate into the hybrid model when we travel to the different regions in our the different areas in our region. We can highlight the specific partners. Like if we were to go up to OMAC, we could talk to those that are part of the, I saw we might have had someone earlier on the call. I don't know if she's still on here. Caroline, did I see
Rochelle?
Yeah.
She had to go and pick up her daughter, but yeah, she
Yeah,
did
so
pop
that's
off.
just a great example of Rochelle doing the work with the core program from OMAC Police Department. And yeah, I think that would be a great thing to incorporate into this convening, and that would help set the stage and kind of, you know, like you mentioned, Peter, and I know in our group when we discussed in the dialogues, it really is easy to focus on the barriers and the challenges and kind of get in that negative mindset, but starting off the convening with that, like, this is what we've done and here's, you know, some positivity, then yeah, sounds like
I'll dovetail on that. I was at a convention in New York City, and that's one of the things that they offered as part of it. It was just a portion of a day, but they put the attendees on a bus and kind of drove us around to showcase some of the different projects that were happening in the city. Talk about enthusiasm to go around and have them showcase some of the projects. There was a community action that was doing some exciting work. There was a homeless shelter and an enhanced shelter that was doing some really exciting projects. And there was a lot of overlap between one of those project developers and the health department. And it was just really great to kind of go through, see what was happening, jot down some ideas, be able to ask questions and get some input about how they got that project going, where they were getting their funding from, how they were collaborating with others in the area. So yeah.
Thank you, Sherry. And sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say that maybe one of our locations could be the Star Hub, and you could share all the amazing work that you're doing if we were to do kind of this traveling hybrid model. So I think,
well, we're not conveniently located, that's for sure. But
that's okay. That's part of it, is that, you know, you often are left out of this because you know, you are off the beaten path. And so how do we ensure that we are making space and traveling to those areas that aren't frequented as often? And I think that your work that you're doing needs to be highlighted. And yeah, I think that if you're up for it, maybe you can be one of our stops for next year.
Well, we're definitely up for it, but we're not conveniently located. And I'm sure there's a lot of great work that's being done that's probably a little more on the beaten path. So, but thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to echo that and kind of get everybody thinking for these meetings next year that was really something that stood out to me, and how we kind of make sure that these partner convenings are something unique and different that we're offering. And I just want to echo, you know, what everyone already said about all the great work that our partners are doing. And I think, you know, being able to see that firsthand is really energizing, and it kind of gets the wheels turning for how people can collaborate. And so, yeah, I'm excited for us to kind of hopefully move in that direction. And if any of you are interested in hosting a meeting or have ideas for any partners who are, you know, you want to learn a little bit more about, definitely reach out to Mariah or I, or really anyone on the staff. But we're excited to kind of put that spotlight on some of our partners through this process.
I mean, you know, we do have technology too, so maybe there would be a way to do it in even like a video meeting format where we get to take a video tour of some of the locations that aren't too convenient to actually be at physically. And it can just sort of be a video tour around some of the locations.
I think that's a great idea. Any other comments in our final? I see Ton has another comment.
Yeah, just the sustainability of all our funding, because we've been awash in funds for the last 2 years, and I can't imagine it's going to keep on. It can't. So what next?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, thank you all so much. I don't know if there's any last minute comments. We appreciate you joining us, and after our hiatus we had this summer, and joining us for our final convening of this year. And then, yeah, as Morgan mentioned, if you have ideas or you want to host or anything that you think of from now until next, you know, our next convening, we're thinking early next year, possibly, January, looking into the first part of next year, and then operating on a quarterly basis. And yeah, thank you so much to everyone on our task force and everyone that provided insight and comments today. We really appreciate you guys.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Bye, everybody.
You all.